Good morning. Are you ready? How do you know? You don't know what's coming yet. All right, I invite you to open your Bibles to Matthew 18. So while you're turning there, the holiday season is upon us. And sadly, what that means for some families is that their family gatherings will either be tense, or there will be some people who ought to be there who will not be there, or they won't even happen. Because somewhere in the past, either recently or long ago, something happened, forgiveness never occurred, and the tension and the separation, the walls still exist. So this morning we're going to talk about forgiveness. It's interesting because it's one of the things that Jesus talked about, probably not the most, but it's right up there, and yet we don't talk about it at all, hardly. You know why? Because it's easier not to talk about it. And how many of us, when push comes to shove, will choose the easiest option no matter what we're doing? So here we go, Matthew chapter 18. By the way, I can assure you that even when you read, you might read through Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, whatever, and you read one story and then another story and you think, that's just random that they're in that order. It's never random. And even if you can't figure out what the connection is, I guarantee you there's always a connection. Look at how Matthew 18 begins. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom?" Now, isn't it true, whether it's kids in a classroom, whether it's people in a race, whether it's people at work, there's always people who are exceeding, and there's always people who are struggling, and there's always people in the middle, right? But isn't it interesting that we never worry about who's the least? We always want to be the greatest. And so when that kid who has parents who are wealthy and love to spoil them comes to school after Christmas and he talks about all the awesome things he got, you go home as a kid feeling like you got ripped off. When the reality is there's probably many more kids in your class that got less than you. And we grown-ups, and we drive down the street and see that nice car go by that we would love to have, and when we gripe about the one that we are in, we forget the fact that some people are on the bus because they can't even afford one. See, the disciples are not so different from us. They come to Jesus and they don't say, "Jesus, how do we go about being the servant of all?" They say, "No, Jesus, who's the greatest?" Jesus, in his amazing way, doesn't directly answer the question. Instead, he calls a child. Now, there's already been a story in Matthew about children, and the children are trying to come to Jesus, and the disciples, get back. Jesus is too great for you. You see, we often talk in the Bible about how women get ripped off and how the Gentiles get ripped off for being seen as less than, but the truth is, in the Jewish culture, nobody was less than a child. So Jesus invites a child forward. And he says, "Assuredly I say to you, unless you are converted, unless your whole thinking changes, unless your heart changes, unless everything about you changes and becomes like this child, you will by no means enter the kingdom. And the disciples, they're thinking, what? That kid doesn't even count. I want to count. Verse 6. Still addressing the disciples, still with the child there. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depths of the sea. See, here's the thing. Whether we recognize it even, we have an emotional pecking order. We have a heart that ranks people. And so when Paris gets attacked, everybody changes their Facebook thing with a French flag, and everybody's all upset because Paris got attacked. Meanwhile, Mali and Beirut and other places got attacked worse. And nobody really said anything. I guarantee you, if the shooting that happened in the United States this last week had happened at the White House, it would have gotten a lot more attention than it got. And I guarantee you that if it happened in Zimbabwe, you wouldn't even have heard about it. Jesus calls the least of society and puts the child in front of him and says, if you do something to this child, better to have a stone tied around your neck and jump into the lake. You say, Pastor Dan, I thought we were talking about forgiveness. Jesus is getting there. Then he tells a story, as he loves to do. Verse 10. I wish we had time to go into more detail, but we don't. Verse 10. Take heed that you do not despise, how many? Not even one of them. For I say to you that in heaven, their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. Did you know that? Every single one of you, from the least to the greatest, from Zimbabwe to Cambodia to Canada, has an angel who sees the face of God, who is responsible solely for you. Why? Why does Jesus have an angel dispatched to every human being? Because the Son of Man has come to seek and save the lost. Disciples, you're worried about who's the greatest. I'm worried about every last single one. Verse 12. What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep, see, now we're talking about value. See, from a sheep I can get this and wool and this and that, and now we're talking value. Forget the kids, sheep have value. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, does he not leave the 99 and go to the mountains to seek the one that is straying? And if he should find it, assuredly I say to you, he parties more over that one sheep than over 99 that never left the sheepfold. Even so, it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. Underline that in your Bible. It is not the will of God that even one should perish. Anybody who comes to you, and there are churches who teach this, that Jesus has chosen some of us for heaven and some of us for hell and for destruction, Jesus said it is not the will of his Father that even one should perish. All right, we're getting closer. Verse 15. I seriously debated having a screen today, and I chose not to. I want you in this chapter. Moreover, if your brother sins against you, who sinned against who? So who's the victim? You're the victim. If your brother does something to you, you're the victim. Go and speak to him. Speak to him? I'll speak to him. He better hope I don't speak to him. Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and speak to him. Do you realize that most of the wars that are being fought on planet Earth started as a family feud that has been passed on from generation to generation to generation? If you are offended by your brother, go and speak to him. You know, I had this boss when I was working in landscaping, trying to pay my way through CUC, which God did far more of the paying than I did, but that's another story altogether. I had this boss, and that man didn't expect you to push a lawnmower. He expected you to run with the lawnmower. And he expected you to run with it in such a way that no grass was missed. But you know, I didn't resent him for it. I respected him for it. You know why? Because he ran. The Bible opens with a story of a God providing everything for Adam and Eve. And then they decide, based on one conversation with a snake, that there was a better way to live than God's way. God could have let them instantly suffer the penalty, which is what? He didn't. God could have destroyed the whole planet with them on it and said, you know what, let's just reboot and start over. Like you kids do with video games, right? It's not going right, so let's just restart. What does God do? They offend him, they hurt him, they doubt him, they mistrust him. He goes and finds them and talks to them. If your brother sins against you, talk to him. If your wife or husband offends you, talk to them. If your child does something that hurts you, tell them. If your parents do something that hurts you, tell them. If somebody hurts you, tell them. We're going to take a little detour. Bear with me. I am not a doctor. This is from livestrong.com. The signs of toxins in your body. In 2002, there were approximately 100,000 chemicals in commercial use in the United States alone. That means the products that you buy and use, there's over 100,000 chemicals being used to make those products. That number grows every year. So 2002, kids, you can tell us that's like ancient history. That's way long time ago. That number grows annually as thousands of new chemicals are registered for use in foods, medications, household cleaning products, lawn care products. It is therefore becoming increasingly difficult, if not impossible, to avoid toxic exposure. Let me make a link with the sermon right now. If you are a living, breathing human being, it is impossible for you to live a life where you will not be hurt by someone. Indeed, in a report published in 2005, again ancient history, the Environmental Working Group found, and this is disgusting and terrifying, an average of 200 industrial chemicals. Industrial chemicals and pollutants, and guess where they found them? On average, 200 in the umbilical cord blood of newborn babies. A newborn baby in 2005 had on average 200 industrial chemicals in his or her blood at birth. Toxic. I was born into a family situation where my grandfather didn't like me, and it had nothing to do with me. Born into toxicity. Skipping ahead, here are general symptoms that you may experience if there are too many toxins in your body. Toxins can cause or contribute to the following: chronic fatigue, body odor, insomnia, food or chemical sensitivities, recurring headaches. Your body, in trying to deal with toxins, can become inflamed. These inflammations can either cause or exacerbate already existing conditions, which include heart disease, Alzheimer's, psoriasis, asthma, arthritis, and many others. Now, you don't need to be a doctor, a Seventh-day Adventist, or even a Christian to understand that all of those things are increasing and increasing and increasing in our society. Why? Because the level of toxicity is increasing and increasing and increasing. Water, cup. How much water can this cup hold? How much water's in here? See, I can pour this much. No problem. Still no problem. What's going to happen if I keep doing what I'm doing? At some point, this cup will not be able to handle what is happening to it. Unless what is in it is taken out of it. Moreover, if your brother sins against you, talk to him. So I have this bad habit. Well, I have a few of them, but I have this one in particular. I read. And when I hear things, I'm not satisfied to just hear what I'm told. I have to figure it out, read more. So one of the things that's been bothering me, and of course it was exacerbated this week with the shooting in San Bernardino, is that this is happening more and more. And I want to know why. It's not normal. And you have all kinds of special interest groups that are picking reasons. One is the atheist. They say, well, it's religion. These ISIS and all this foolishness, if we could just get rid of religion, we wouldn't have any problem. Maybe. Some say it's the guns. If there weren't so many guns in America, there wouldn't be all these shootings. Religion, guns. But then I got to thinking, America has always had religion. And America has always had guns. But what they haven't always had, people collecting guns and then going into a public square and shooting people for no good reason. Why is it happening? When I was a kid in school, there was a shooting in Quebec. I don't know how many of you remember. It was at the École Polytechnique. A guy went into an all-girls classroom and he just unloaded his gun. That's not supposed to happen in Canada. Thankfully, it happens here far less than it happens in other places. But when it happened, of course, everybody wanted to know, why did he do this? He didn't know anybody in that classroom. So people started digging. You know what they found out? He had a horrible relationship with his mother. And then they found out that he'd had a series of romantic relationships with women that had all gone wrong. And his frustration, hatred, angst against women increased and increased and increased until one day he just couldn't take it anymore. And he said, I'm going to kill myself, but before I kill myself, I'm going to take out as many women as I know how to do. And he did. And so while we're blaming guns and religion, which have always existed and have never caused this problem before, the real problem, do you know what it is? We are toxic. And we don't know what to do about it. Until one day it gets so toxic that we just explode. Fathers walk out, mothers walk out, children abandon their parents, people take guns and shoot each other. Crazy things that shouldn't happen. I went to a funeral yesterday and they played at the end of the funeral, Grandpa, tell me about the good old days. Where love actually lasted, where people made a promise and they kept it. Toxic. Jesus' solution to the toxicity of our emotions is when somebody hurts you, talk to them. Verse 16. Now Jesus knows that this will not always work. So he continued. But if he will not listen to you, if you can't work it out, take with you one or two. By the way, I skipped an important word. Verse 15, we got to go back. Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him or her alone. Let me tell you, as a pastor, there is nothing that I have less patience for than gossip, than speaking about people behind their backs. Because I've been in this for 16 years and I have seen the destruction. Speak to them alone. If that does not work, verse 16, take one or two. What's the purpose of bringing more people in? To make sure that whatever the argument is, that people understand what it is and establish all the facts. Sometimes we get into a misunderstanding and our thinking gets twisted and the other person's thinking gets twisted and we are not capable anymore of even establishing what actually happened. Then bring one or two people that you know love you and that you trust and figure it out. 17. Still, this might not work. If he refuses to hear you and to hear them, then tell it to the church. If he still refuses, even to hear the church, and don't miss this one, let him be to you like a heathen or a tax collector. What does that mean? Well, I can tell you what it means in the Jewish mind. In the Jewish mind, it means, fine, I can just cut them loose and forget about them. But how did Jesus treat tax collectors and heathens? All right, one more story. Verse 21. Now remember, this is all in answer to the question, Jesus, who's the greatest? We're going to come back to that at the end. So Peter's listening to Jesus telling these stories and putting the child in front of them, and the wheels are starting to turn, and he's starting to realize what Jesus is saying. And so he says, trying to be at the head of the class and still be the greatest, he says to Jesus, Lord, how often shall I forgive my sin against my brother who sins against me? And I forgive him even 7 times? Because they had a culture in the Jewish, it's like our baseball. 3 strikes, and you're out. So Peter knows this, and Peter says, Jesus, I'm starting to see this, and I want to be at the front of the class. So Jesus, is it even 7 times? Jesus said to Peter, I do not say to you up to 7 times. I say to you 70 times 7. And I wish we had time to go into it, but there's a prophecy in Daniel that he's referring to here. 70 weeks, 70 times 7. And that 70-week prophecy ends with Jesus stretching out his arms and saying, Father, forgive them, because they don't know what they're doing. "23. One last story. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like. And Jesus started so many stories this way. We'd be so better off as Seventh-day Adventists if we were pointing people to what the kingdom of heaven is like rather than what they aren't. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who desired to settle accounts with his servants. Church, I don't know how many times I've read Matthew 18. This was the first week that I actually understood this verse. It doesn't say the king desired to collect his cash. it says the king desired to settle the accounts. You see, I've been on a school board where sometimes we have to settle the accounts. Sometimes it involves money coming to our school, and sometimes it involves just saying, you know what? Let's just forget about it. And when the school votes to forget about an account, it doesn't matter if you owed $10 or $20,000. When the school decides, we are done with this account, you don't owe anything. The king just wanted to settle the accounts with his servants. I'm telling you, church, from the moment that Adam and Eve walked out of the Garden of Eden, God has had one desire and one desire only, and that is to settle the accounts so we can come back. Verse 24, when he had begun to settle the accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. In today's money, US dollars, roughly 100,000. You know what's mind-boggling about this? Servants is actually a mistranslation. It can be translated either way, but the context suggests that these are not servants, these are slaves. What kind of slave master is so generous that he allows a slave to accrue a debt of 100,000? $25. But as he was not able to pay, as if the king didn't know that before he called him, his master commanded and said, well, let's sell him and his wife and his children, all that he has, so that payment can be made. The servant therefore fell down before him and said, Master, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. You know what that sounds like? Sounds like the son who went to the far country and came back and said, Dad, I'm home. I'm going to make it all right. The master said to the servant, he was moved with compassion, he released him and canceled the debt. See, he just wanted to settle the accounts. Because you know what happens when an account isn't settled? You know what happens? You know what happens when you owe somebody money? You call them, see how they're doing? Do you stop by their house and have tea? You see, when an account is not settled, a wall goes up. You can't see the wall. You can't punch the wall. But it's there. And the longer the account remains unsettled, the higher and the thicker the wall becomes. And the king wanted to take the wall down. So he forgave the debt. Do you know why he did that? Don't miss this. Because the servant was worth more to him as a person than the cash was that he owed him. Do you know what we're really saying? When somebody hurts us, and we allow that hurt to totally remove them from our lives, do you know what we're saying? We're saying, my pride, my hurt feelings, are worth more to me than you are. I would rather live with my hurt feelings and without you. The king didn't want it that way. He said, if that's what it takes, then just cancel the debt. I want my servant back. The disciples began all this by asking the question, who is the greatest? When they asked the question, they were thinking about themselves. When you're nursing a pain, you're thinking about yourself. How could they do that to me? How could they say that to me? How could they think that way? Betray me like that? How? Me. And Jesus flipped it all around and he said, forget that. Who's the greatest? The people you've forgotten. The people you don't even count. I can't live without. Do you know what heaven has done to show us how much we are worth? How many of you have bought something this week? Anything? So when you went to buy it, you had some money, or you had credit, or you had whatever you had. Hopefully you had money for it. And you went and you exchanged what you had that was of worth to something that you felt was either of equal worth or maybe even more. Maybe you felt like you got a deal. Maybe you feel like you came home with more than you even spent. But what you were willing to spend says about you that you valued that thing at least that much money. God can tell you he loves you. I can tell you I love you. Anybody can say that. Lots of guys say that, and the next morning they leave, and you don't even know where they went, and they never call back. So heaven didn't just say he loved us. God didn't just say that. He says, you want to see how much I love you? I'm going to take him who is the greatest. I'm going to let you use him and abuse him. I'm going to let you kill him. And while you're killing him, he's going to forgive you. Because it's more important to me to have you than to hold on to all the things you've done against me. Unfortunately, the story's not over. 28. So the servant who owed $100,000 is free and forgiven. 28, but that servant went out. He found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. If you value what the servant owed the master, the king, at 100,000, then this 100 denarii is worth $10 US. He laid his hands on him. He took him by the throat. The literal Greek, he choked him. Hands around the neck, squeezing, pay me what I owe you. Pay me what you owe me. The fellow servant falls down at his feet and begs him. Verse 30. He wouldn't. He wouldn't listen. Wouldn't have compassion, wouldn't forgive him, but instead he went and he threw him into prison for $10. How's it feel? How's it feel to have legitimately hurt somebody, but then you try everything you can to fix it, but they just don't, they're not interested. They would just rather hate you. When the king was told what happened, everything changed. I want you to understand why. I want you to understand why some will be in heaven and some will not. Because in heaven, relationship will matter more than anything. In heaven, people matter more than anything. God has done everything that He has done to make it possible to bring His people home. But what He will not allow is for people to come back to His home who will insist on carrying on the vengeance and the hatred and the bitterness and the envy, and heaven will become hell again. You will not miss out on heaven because God doesn't love you, and you will not miss out on heaven because God did not forgive you. You will miss out on heaven because you refused to extend to others what God freely extended to you. Jesus understands that you may extend it and they may not reciprocate, and that's entirely possible. In fact, Romans and Hebrews both say, as much as it is possible for you, live at peace with all men. So here's a practical suggestion for you as this sermon ends. There may be somebody in your life that you're not in relationship with anymore for whatever the reason. It's none of my business. You've tried and it's not working. Here's what I want you to do. And I'm telling you right now, it's going to be hard. Every time your family gathers, every time you gather with your friends, every time you gather somewhere where that person should be there, where you want them there, but circumstances don't allow them to be there, put a chair. Leave it empty. Do not allow bitterness, no matter what they're saying or doing, to kill your love for them. Because I can guarantee you, there is nothing that you can do, have done, or ever will do that will kill His love for you. So what right do we have